I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Vermont Climate Council Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. I had to remember where I was.
A lot of meetings, perhaps?
I know. Glad to see everybody. Why don't we start off with a roll call? And I have my list in front of me. So Catherine, I can do that if you want.
All right, sounds great.
Okay, so Catherine Dimitrick here, Ornament here, Lindsay Curley, I see hers, and I also see Ken Jones, Chad Farrell, is he on? Okay, and then Joe Sagali for Joe Flynn, Ann Lawless, welcome Ann.
Thank you.
Our newest member, Karen Horn. Okay, and Mike Burke. And I see Dave Snedeker is on.
Hi, Erica.
Hello. And for staff, Ann Margolis from Public Service. Ben Rose, I see. Stephanie Smith, I see. Marianne Wolz, I see. Sue Charbonneau, I see. And do I see Gary Holloway? Okay, and I also see Jane. So I think we have everybody, and I think we have. Hey, Catherine, I have to take this. Would you mind? Thank you.
Sure, I can take it. Hi, thank you. So I think that was the full roll call. Gary, I see you are here. Thank you. And you're doing what I thought about doing, which was moving outside. I'm so glad you did it.
Oh, you know, if you're going to slot me in at 3 o'clock on a Friday, I got to be outside.
Oh, I love it. It's perfect. So next on the agenda, we have review and approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next part of this item, which is the 3/5/21 minutes. Did everybody have a chance to review them? And is anyone willing to make a motion on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Joe. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Abstentions?
I'll abstain, Catherine. I wasn't here. This is Dave.
All right, thanks, Dave.
I will abstain as well. And
All right, Ann and Dave are abstaining. Thanks very much. Next up, we have the subcommittee membership update. So, I see you're back with us, Erica.
Sorry, it was FEMA. I had to call. I had to talk.
That was quick. So a couple of updates. We have Ann and Dave with us, and for their first time today. I don't know if you would like to take a minute to introduce yourselves.
sure. My name's Ann Lawless. I retired a few years ago as executive director at the American Precision Museum in Windsor. I live in Wheelock in the Northeast Kingdom. I serve on the select board. I'm the chair. I serve on the select board there.
Thanks, Ann. Dave?
Oops. Hi, Dave Snedeker, Director of the Northeastern Vermont Development Association. So we're a joint regional planning commission and development corporation that covers Caledonia, Essex, and Orleans counties.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, the update that I wanted to give is in regards to our member from the Vermont Land Trust, Donald, whose last name escapes me right now. Campbell. Yeah, Don Campbell. He did let me know that he is unable to join the subcommittee because of time commitments at his position at the land trust and him just recognizing he would not be able to participate. So that leaves us having a vacant slot in terms of the natural conservation landscape scale representative that Don was serving. And so the question that we need to talk about is whether there's someone else we should be inviting to join the subcommittee, or if we can work to fill that role with state staff perhaps, or some other method of getting that perspective on the subcommittee.
I'll just add one comment.
Oh, go ahead, Jane. Sorry.
Hi, everybody. Afternoon. I just wanted two comments or thoughts about that because I'm a little biased, but I think that's really important perspective for this committee. And originally, early on in the sort of thinking about subcommittee membership, we reached out at the suggestion of our secretary to Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, thinking that someone from their staff would be really appropriate specifically for this committee. At the time, they didn't put anybody forward, but that might be worth a revisit. And then, so that's one suggestion if you don't have somebody in your current nominations. But then I'll also suggest that one of the staff members that we had suggested for this committee, Jens Hilke, who would bring that experience and expertise really well, actually, and tie it into a lot of the planning and other stuff. He because of sort of like severe short staffing in Fish and Wildlife right now, he was asked not to staff the committee, but he was nominated outside of his work at Fish and Wildlife through the nomination process, and he was self-nominated because he really wanted to be involved. So he would be another person I might suggest, or you guys could consider. Perhaps he would serve in a sort of a personal, professional capacity, but not on the clock, sort of speak. I don't know how that would work, but it's another idea. So, but then I would encourage, if you already had ideas, or to revisit the nominations, obviously, if there were backups. And I'm sorry, because I missed that one meeting. There might be ideas.
I remember Jen Holler didn't we talk about Jen Holler and decided?
Yep, she was, so we had kind of ranked some folks that we wanted to make sure we asked first. And if folks were not able to commit, then we had a few folks that we would follow up with in their place. And Jen Holler was one that we had highlighted yellow.
She would be great. And there's other people in her staff at VHCB that would be great too. So maybe she could, if she didn't have time, she could designate or something.
Yeah, and I'll note that our subcommittee, the number of people that are voting members on the subcommittee are 10. Or I'm sorry, 9. 9. And I think we were still waiting to hear about Mindy Blank.
Mm-hmm. So Joe mentioned Jen, and Jane's nodding her head a lot. I'm not sure who else on the subcommittee might know her. She does have a long history of working primarily in housing now, but certainly an experience and exposure in other areas related to land use and overall community development. And as noted, does have staff at VHCB that could be called upon to assist with some other questions as well. What do people think about inviting Jen?
I support that. I just do know that, and I don't know, I'm saying this because I don't know the depth of, I mean, I know Jen, but I don't know, what expertise she brings in terms of the land use piece of it. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons we wanted somebody from the land trust was because of, the natural systems solution that we would want to bring into some resilience recommendations here. That's not to say that if we don't have a member that is that's joining us for every meeting that represents that we can't tap into those resources. But there's value in having that expertise be a part of our regular conversation.
Where does that expert natural-based solutions, is that an A&R, stormwater management type of person, or rivers person, or where is that expertise? When I think of nature-based, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we had also asked, I had thought that Rob Evans from the Rivers program would be able to join us as well. And, they just, because of staff constraints, I guess, or time constraints, they weren't able to either. He wasn't able to either. And I don't know if like Ned Swanberg would be a good replacement there. I'm interested to hear, and I'm interested to hear from the folks, from my mitigation folks, if you have any suggestions.
Yeah,
Perhaps John Brooker Campbell.
Was there anybody else on the nomination list, or
Yeah.
I guess I think your question, Joe, is really a good one to think about, is like what are we trying to get at with this person? And I love the idea, thinking about a whole systems thinker. I'm sure there's other people out there like Jens, and I don't mean to call on him as the only one, but he's an ecologist by training, but he works in the planning realm and is could speak to everything that we just talked about. He could speak to VHCB, he could speak to Rivers program, wetlands, a lot of stuff to tie together nicely the nature-based solutions aspect of the resiliency work.
So we have Kate McCarthy from the Natural Resources Council. I might have to just share my screen here so people can see this as I scroll through, because I certainly don't know everybody. Why don't I just do that?
Kate McCarthy would be a great fit, I think, for this group. I'm working with her. She's got a really strong planning background and kind of smart growth kind of development. From the policy end, I think she's been involved in just a lot of different areas, so it could be a good, well-rounded person to add in the mix.
Okay, so this, folks can, I don't know if you can see it, on your own screen, if you need to zoom in, you can press Control and then zoom in with your mouse. These are the folks that we had ranked as highest, the green, and then yellow was next to ask next. I don't know why those are that color, but and then these are just folks that they weren't listed as high ranking, but they were still, many of them were nominated multiple times, and we had to look at this from a geographic dispersion perspective, as well as a number of other factors. So some of the reasons why they didn't rank highly. So I'm just going to scroll down slowly, and if anybody sees anybody that we should call out, just speak up.
And that was one of the reasons why Don ranked highly, in addition to his expertise, was his location in Bennington.
There were so many.
There were so many. I'm wondering if what might make sense, if there's not an obvious choice at this moment, if we share this list again with people, and then get some feedback in advance of our next meeting, and we could narrow it down.
Okay.
Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
want us
think
to
that,
like rank 1 through 3 or something?
or yeah, you like pick your top 3.
Okay. Yeah, okay, perfect.
It might, when you share that, it might be great to just sort of, for you guys as co-chairs to prioritize what you're like, what's the missing
Yeah.
experience. Yeah. So.
Yeah, okay.
If you could, it would be very helpful for me if I knew a little bit more about the other committee members who are on this committee, especially about the geographic stuff.
I was thinking the same thing. Yes.
Not too hard.
Right. So we do have our final subcommittee composition, and I've made some updates to that I'll have to share with you. I don't have the geographic representation on there. So we'll have to add a column or something. We can do that. So just to be clear, what we'll ask for in terms of your ranking on the Google sheet is just to name your top 3 choices, and then we'll work from there. Okay.
And I'm sure you'll all be experts in your open governance training after you've all looked at the email from earlier this week. But obviously, just when you're doing that, just share it with Erica and Catherine, and don't have back and forth about that.
Erica, can I add someone who I don't think was on the list?
Mm.
Sorry if that
well-
makes it more complicated.
Well, I think we want to work from the folks that were nominated to be the fairest, Stephanie.
Okay.
But just out of curiosity, who did you want to add?
I was thinking Shane Jaquith from TNC.
Oh, he would be good. Mhm.
Sorry, just throw that in there.
Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah,
Okay,
well,
we
I think
have folks that
just
do.
as a process order, Erica, I'll just say that on the Ag and Ecosystems Committee earlier this morning, a key area of expertise for them that they needed was a forester. They decided, somebody who was a practicing active forester, and the nominations just didn't bring anybody forward, that except for one who they offered it to, and he declined. And so I think that your proposal to review and rank the nominations in front of you all, but if the expertise is not bubbling up that you need to satisfy the committee, then considering folks like Shane make a lot of sense.
Yep. Okay, great. I think it is important for us to have that perspective on here, so we will pursue that doggedly.
Yes. And so if you are suggesting, if you feel the need to suggest to a key individual who's not on the list, providing some background information like we have in the nominees would be super helpful to go along with that. Because not everybody said, ooh, she said Shane, because we don't know who he is or she.
So we will, so I'll take the spreadsheet that's on the Google Doc and just put it into an Excel sheet, and that way people can just share the results back to me, and then I'll compile them so that we can present them at the next meeting. Okay. What's next on the agenda?
So next on the agenda, work plan development. That's you, Erica.
Yeah,
because you have the document.
Yes. So thank you, Jane, for providing some information to us in terms of developing a work plan. So Jane provided a Gantt chart template that we can use to input our information in terms of the work plan that we will be developing. Catherine and I were talking, and I think the easiest way to do this, because we really need to do some kind of idea generation, and I think probably the easiest way for us to do that is to not look at the Gantt chart right now. We'll use that as the final product, but I'm going to pull up a just a plain Word document that has our deliverables as outlined in statute. And we will work from that, because we don't want to lose sight of our statutory deliverables. And then if we have other deliverables that we feel as a committee are important, we'll make sure to put them down. But I told Catherine that whenever I approach like work planning or trying to identify like goals and strategies, I approach it like developing an incident action plan for the EOC because it's the best way, in my experience, to bring multiple functions together into a single direction. And it's really a simple identifying the objective, identifying the multiple strategies to get to that objective, as well as any metrics or milestones to be tracking who's responsible in a timeline. And so that's what I'm proposing where we start from. If folks have any tweaks or want to completely change that approach altogether, go ahead and speak up.
Well, I have a question. Maybe we're on the same page, but I was just looking at the information that got sent out about how we're supposed to structure these work programs. And there are these 7 tasks. And I was thinking that, we might want to structure the work program around that, right? And make sure that we bring in those, there's like 6 or 7, as you mentioned, Erica. They're almost strategies in and of themselves, but in the Global Warming Solutions Act, there are those 6 or 7 things that we're supposed to do. But I don't think that's everything that we need to do. And so is there a way that...
So that's a really good point, Joe, because Catherine and I were kind of struggling with like how we marry those two, because it's almost like some of the tasks are overlapping that are outlined in the statute and that are outlined in the the Gantt chart and in the timeline for the committee. And I don't know, Jane, if you can kind of speak to, how we best can marry that, what should take precedence. We don't want to lose one or the other, but I couldn't help but notice that like some of the things that are identified in the Climate Council timeline may or may not affect us. And we may need to look at prioritizing the actions in the statute, but maybe you can speak that out a little bit.
Yeah, I'll do my best. So the document that I think Joe's referring to is the PDF that came along with the Gantt chart. And am I correct that with and those 7? Yeah. So those 7 tasks were taken straight from the statute, right? And they've really been like a grounding point, I think, for the secretaries. I know that like Secretary Young and Secretary Moore that keep coming back to like there's this sequence of order of things that are supposed to happen, but first and foremost an inventory, keep kind of ground us back into those things, recognizing that there's also the statutory obligations of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And so I think you're right that there are things that are sort of independent in the Climate Council, but then also calling attention to your specific statutory obligations and how that all feeds in. And that's like just that Gantt chart is just the initial like space to start to do that. And what I've been hoping, and I haven't sent this sort of email yet to frame, but for the council meeting on the 22nd, it wouldn't be that you would be sharing your Gantt chart, because that would be really overwhelming to just keep reviewing one Gantt chart after another from subcommittees, but rather like to try to work through that and work through how those timelines sync with the specific statutory requirements of your subcommittee, as well as the other work that you might want to take on beyond your statutory requirements, or, mindful, maybe you wouldn't do that, but it sounds like many folks are thinking outside of the mere statutory requirements. And then sort of the reflections on what those milestones and that timeline, like what are the questions it brings up for your subcommittee in terms of like how you're going to meet these deadlines? Is it possible? What are the services you're going to need? How are the timelines of what I put forward in when those contractual services are going to be available to you jive with the timeline that we've set for how you have to come forward to the Climate Council? So I don't expect anything to feel clear right now. And I hope that these are just tools like to help to get you thinking about the timelines in front of you and the larger statutory requirements of the climate action plan, and then how your pieces fit into those 7 steps along the way.
So why don't I share what I put together? These are the 6 items that were identified in the resilience and adaptation portion of the, now hopefully this is the right one. No, here it is. There you go. So I think we can accomplish both by identifying what our primary objectives are in terms of what's required of this subcommittee in statute, and making sure that we are accounting for the larger, in the accomplishment of these objectives, we are accomplishing the larger objectives of the entire Global Warming Solutions Act, which is, like you said, Jane, that order of things. So for example, when we're, one of the items in the larger Global Warming Solutions Act is evaluating impact and cost effectiveness of specific initiatives, programs, and strategies. What we can see here in Objective 1, we have a very similar task outlined right there. And when we're identifying the strategies to complete that, we take into account the accomplishing what is, some of the umbrella requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. Does that make sense?
It does to me, Erica. Yeah.
Okay. So why don't
I think
go ahead.
Before we dive into this, one of the things that I noted to Erica that I think would be helpful for me in terms of trying to achieve some clarity is, I think you had mentioned at some point soon we might see an outline of what the climate action plan might look like, and therefore understand what pieces of our work will need to fit into that. And that sort of context would be helpful for me as we move forward in trying to figure this out, because it really is a challenge to figure out which is the driver. Is it these 6 objectives here, or is it the overall statutory requirements for developing the climate action plan? Which is the driver of our work? When does each take precedent, and how do we manage all of that?
I know I mean, the simple answer is they're all statutory requirements. If they were called out specific to your subcommittee, the question for me becomes like the climate action plan. One of both the amazing things about the Global Warming Solutions Act and maybe the challenges is the legislature gave the approval of that plan to the Climate Council. So the legislature, doesn't vote on the acceptance of the plan, the Climate Council will. And so I think it's very real and fair, and that's what I'm hoping you'll all be getting at, is to recognize what are the overarching objectives of the climate action plan as spelled out in the statute, and then what are your specific subcommittees being asked to do, and what's really possible, like for this first plan and back and forth, and then recognizing, just recognizing what we feel is satisfactory at some point, and calling that question with the Climate Council and having it be an iterative process back and forth around the work of the subcommittees. I'm not sure I'm saying that perfectly, but I'm recognizing that, some of the things, like having all of everything, going from the what, which is what you're doing now, to the how is a big leap, sort of like what are we doing, but how we're going to actually accomplish it. What are the specific rules A&R is going to adopt? What are the policies? What are the things we're going to push through legislative initiatives? That's all statutorily required in this first climate action plan. And that's all due by December 1st.
So in summary, we should just move forward with a level of confusion and unknowns that we all have to just accept and focus on what we know, which is these items here.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
this is what we know the most.
Thank you. Yeah.
Would that be a fair reflection of where we're at?
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
I
Great.
think that's great.
I think, and I think we can do our best to, again, ensure that we're meeting the umbrella intent of the Global Warming Solutions Act by accomplishing these that are specifically tasked to this subcommittee. So, let's begin some discussion around this, because we have these 6 pretty large areas in front of us, and I have reordered them a little bit because of the way, again, in honoring some of the order of things that is asked for in the Global Warming Solutions Act. I reordered these to reflect what we kind of have to logically do first in order to get to next. So if anybody thinks that the order needs to be redone, just let me know. But I think we can kind of go down through each of the objectives. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. I'm just going to be taking a bunch of notes, but this is really meant to be a discussion about where what we as a subcommittee want to accomplish in driving toward achieving these objectives. So if we start with number 1, reviewing existing planning efforts, including local and regional land use planning, transportation planning, energy planning, operations planning, and identifying opportunities to better integrate and support these efforts in service of GHG emissions reductions, building resilience, and designing a resilient future. That's pretty simple. That's definitely a measurable objective. We probably need to break that down a bit in terms of how, to the way that we write our strategy so that we can accomplish the objective as a whole. Don't everybody jump in at once.
Well, what I was thinking was that number 1 objective, and I think Joe brought this up last week, it all makes sense until we get to the GHG part. Because unless you're looking at resilience from the reduction of that, and I think just getting our head around that versus resilience and building better roads, things like that, and where does that GHG fall under there? I think we talked about last time it might be for one of the other subcommittees for us to work with at the same time. I think Joe mentioned, how does reducing fossil fuels at a school help the overall resiliency of the other things we're trying to plan at? And I want to get it all. I'm not saying we don't. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
I mean, I see that as 2 different things that are going on, which I said the last time. And maybe we need some direction from the overall council on this question. Or just say, what do you, do people feel comfortable that the cross mitigation sector group, whatever it's called, is going to adequately cover this, the GHG reduction piece of it, so that we can focus on the resilience piece of it?
Unless it's adding vegetation, which will help absorb carbon, right? So
yeah, we can think about it in terms of just co-benefits. Maybe it's like the primary thing we're trying to do here, like with nature-based solutions, is improve, I don't know, the ability to absorb floods or something. Oh, and by the way, it also, I guess, absorbs more carbon or something. Maybe that's how we could frame it.
Yeah, I think it's the way I read that. It's somewhat of the co-benefit that you mentioned, Joe. It's really looking at what are we doing now And regardless of what the main goal is, whether it's, increasing renewable energy because it's the energy plan, or it's some other goal, how can we take these existing programs or planning efforts and ensure that the co-benefit of greenhouse gas emissions is one of the key outcomes? Yeah, is there anything we can do to tweak these programs or enhance them or pair them or anything like that?
I mean, I guess like if we're going to prioritize someday whatever list we come up with, something that, improves resilience and reduces greenhouse gas emissions probably should, rise to the top of the list.
So we have a really great inventory that Joe provided that has been worked on with the VEM mitigation folks, which is an inventory of adaptation and resilience activities. It looks like that could potentially be the starting point for the overall inventory. There's a lot on there. There's a lot of analysis that's already been done on there. Does it make sense to utilize that as the starting point? And I'm just trying to think of how do we, what is our outcome? What's our desired outcome with this objective? And how does that feed into the plan? Is the outcome meant to be that we have a good inventory to draw from to make recommendations upon, or is it that we need to produce some sort of inventory report and or review every single program and building statute of program? I don't know. I hope it's not the latter. I hope it's the former.
When I see the objective, I think of if we find something that produces multiple benefits in towns or communities where something has already been done, that we could duplicate that as a template to be able to do in other places. Like that's what I see that we may gain from the inventory of the planning efforts already.
Well, I think that, the GWSA, it's the solutions. It's like ultimately we're trying to come up with solutions, right? So everything has to feet push in that direction. And, I saw the inventory as this is, I think you have it here, which is A, the inventory, and B, the gap analysis. And the gap analysis then sort of helps us identify those areas where, maybe we need to, maybe something we're doing now isn't, it could be improved in terms of what it's doing. And then maybe there's just threats that we aren't identifying. And I wanted to also just suggest, I think there's something between A and B, and it's the identification of the threats, which are, so we have to be resilient to something. It's not just climate change. There's specific threats that are identified in Global Warming Solutions Act, like, flooding, extreme weather, of course, but there's like vector-borne diseases, snow melt. There's a few other things. And I thought it would be, I thought we should talk about that and figure out, categorize those. Are they happening fast, slow? What are the impacts significant or minor? But also, are there threats that aren't identified in Global Warming Solutions Act that we should be considering? And then you kind of can overlay the threats with the programs, and that's where you get the gap analysis. And from there, you work on solutions.
So identifying threats and hazards that impact overall resilience, to establish a baseline, as well as to rank or understand which of those threats and hazards are being exacerbated by climate change. So, for example, one threat that exists for all towns in states is cybersecurity. But is that being exacerbated by climate change more than maybe flooding is? I think the answer is pretty obvious there. But you know what, I love that joke, because that's what are we really talking about here? What are we trying to be more resilient from here?
And it's a pretty, you know, if you want me to read it really quick, it's, you know, the severity of storms, more frequent cyanobacteria blooms, adverse impacts of forests, ag soils, forest and crop damage, shorter and regular sugaring season, that's a long one, reduction in seasonal snow cover and the resulting, you know, impact of that on the, you know, ski industry, et cetera, wildlife movement. So those are the ones that these are the threats we need to be resilient to based on the act. And so is there anything else? Or maybe we just don't want to look for anything else and, you know, not complicate this, but it would seem, you know, maybe we should ask the public if there's other threats that, you know, they perceive from climate change that we should be thinking about.
Like, what's the common definition here that we're working towards?
And then perhaps another strategy, if we're looking at the co-benefit, is to identify which of these, you know, which of in this inventory has the co-benefit or could have the co-benefit of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Now we're moving. Keep going, keep going. By the way, I don't think we have to identify who's responsible yet. That's a more uncomfortable conversation, and it's how we get it done. Let's just identify what the strategies and steps are, and then we'll go from there.
Ben, I see you have a hand up.
Thank you. I was just going to say that for strategy, we did that for the state hazard mitigation plan. It's in there.
What was that, Ben? Can you repeat that?
I say for strategy B, we did that exercise for the state hazard mitigation plan, and it's in there. There's a lot in the state hazard mitigation plan that touches on this.
Are you trying to say some of this work's already done, Ben? That's awesome. Okay, so under objective 1, do we? I'm gonna review the overarching item in the Global Warming Solutions Act. I have this kind of up, and I'm just gonna read it out. So it's the identification and analysis of new strategies and programs. Actually, that's under objective 2, sorry. It's really inventory of existing programs with completed equity impact assessment. So there's a piece of that I think we need to incorporate probably in our in what we're discussing.
Maybe.
So it's an inventory of existing programs with completed equity impact assessment. Now, Jane, is that something, the equity impact assessment, so at some point, this inventory, along with our gap analysis and assessment on co-benefits, will also need an assessment on through an equity lens. Now, is that something that this committee would be doing, or Just Transitions would be doing?
Just Transitions, yeah.
Okay. All right. So do we need to, okay, so we'll probably, I imagine there may be another strategy down the road here that's related to identifying any of those items that for the Just Transitions Committee to take a look at.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Erica. And I also think, I'm not sure how to frame it, like in the email that I shared with you all this week, the co-chairs and subcommittees around, the Gantt chart was the first step to then, and these work plans to then share with Just Transitions in Science and Data, who are really in service to all of your work of the sort of technical subcommittees. And so having them sort of know, one of their first tasks is to set up the principles for the lens of the Just Transitions work, the equity lens. And, they have tools to build off of, like Susanna's work that she's designed for state policy review, but they will be in service to you for these kinds of issues and things. And hopefully your work planning will help them inform their own timelines and when they need to sort of be prepared to be working closely with which subcommittees.
Okay. Do we feel like we are pretty good on objective 1? I mean, obviously we'll probably add stuff down the road here, but we've kind of captured the main steps. Okay, when we move to objective 2, develop best practice recommendations specific to rural communities for reducing municipal school district and residential fossil fuel consumption, fortifying critical transportation, electricity, and community. Is it community or communications infrastructure? Yeah, and creating a distributed, redundant, and storage supported local electrical system.
I thought when we read it last week, it was communication.
Yeah, I maybe I'll just have to double check that. I think it is communication. Hold on.
In community infrastructure. No, last week's it said community too.
Yeah, it is community. That's in the description.
Huh. That can mean anything.
Well, so in our in the subcommittee description, in the first part of the description, it includes its pressures climate change will place on Vermont's transportation, electricity, housing, emergency services, and communications infrastructure. But this is one of the sub-bullets with, as a charge to the subcommittee, and they just made it community infrastructure. We could probably extrapolate what that means.
I mean, that could be a
Meaning
senior
it probably
center.
means communications.
Or it could mean senior center.
It includes communications. I think it probably can, like, you're right, it could be a lot of things.
Yeah.
We could probably draw on, and this is probably part of this, is to understand what critical infrastructure is in, like, to establish a common definition of critical infrastructure. Because if we're going to be developing some best practice recommendations, we're going to that's going to play into some of those recommendations. And we've got some of that defined at EM. A lot of that defined at EM.
I think that makes sense, because otherwise, community infrastructure could be such a large category. Narrowing that down to the critical infrastructure, I think, would be a reasonable approach. And in looking at this objective, every time I read it, I get a little overwhelmed, because it really is 3 separate objectives in many ways. Because we're developing best practice recommendations for 3 really separate areas. One being reducing fossil fuel consumption, the second being the infrastructure, and then the third being the electric system.
Well, should we break out the strategies along those 3 lines then?
I almost feel like we have to. It seems like the second and the third could be pulled in together a little bit, but really the first one is very different than the other 2.
And like the last one seems pretty way out of my area of expertise, but it seems.
But that's why we have Mike here.
Seems pretty prescriptive, right? Do this. Create a distributed, redundant storage supported local electric system.
Yeah.
Luckily,
What
we've
else?
already started that.
Yeah, what else is there to say about
Mike's like, I know some people. So develop best practice recommendations specific to rural communities for reducing municipal school district and residential fossil fuel consumption. How do we get there? So we probably need to, there probably needs to be an assessment of what those entities are using for fossil fuel.
Would there be something in the comprehensive energy plan about that? Does it drill down that far? Or even the work that, the Energy Action Network, the presentation we got, it seems like they had a lot of good information.
I think this is Anne from the Department of Public Service. We have been, I think, chasing fossil fuel data to try to get, we've heard this from the regional planning commissions for their Act 174 energy planning, that it would be really great to have fossil fuel consumption data down at the municipal level, or even the county level or regional planning commission level. To get actual consumption is not possible right now. There's protections on, that really would come through tax filings, and there's protections around numbers of filers and the location of where those filers are versus where those sales are made. So I would say it can be, this is something that maybe could end up as a recommendation for trying to create a framework to get that information at a more detailed level, but it's not available right now. We have to just make a lot of assumptions based on per capita, et cetera.
Is it available even at like the statewide scale?
Statewide fossil fuel consumption is available.
By the sectors, by like those sectors that are up
No, not by sector. I can get this group a little bit more information from some folks. I'm not the one that's working on that at the department, but we have some folks who have been really trying to drill down on what's available by sector, by geography.
And is there there's another subcommittee that's working on recommendations generally on reducing municipal, school, and residential fossil fuel consumption? And we are just, and are we?
I think that's firmly in the cross sector.
So is our role here then to take their recommendations and fine tune them for the rural communities? Or are we expected to start from scratch here?
It's a good question. I don't see the role of this committee in thinking about emissions reductions through like in rural communities. I think about those sectors being covered by the cross-sector mitigation group, and therefore you thinking about the impacts of those policies and decisions on the rural communities. But
that seems far more doable from my perspective, to take their recommendations and put them through the filter of the rural community lens that we have. What do other people think about that?
Love it.
It still seems out of place to me.
Makes sense.
Based on what not a resilience issue, but I won't say
But
that.
we're the rural, it's a rural issue though, because we're being asked to look at this from a rural perspective.
I agree with you. It is kind of the same thing we asked in objective 1. We've come back to that again. But taking recommendations from the cross-sector mitigation and applying it here, I think would work.
So I've written refine cross-sector mitigation subcommittee recommendations on reducing GHG emissions for rural communities, and I'll add some language to that, but basically to refine what their recommendations are and translate that into recommendations for rural communities.
Anne and Dave, I know that you're both new to our committee discussions. We haven't really talked about this much before today anyway, so don't feel like you're starting from way behind. I'm just curious if that kind of rings true as an approach from your perspective as Wheelock Select Board Chair and NVDA.
I know that, oops, go ahead, Ann.
No, go ahead, Dave.
I know back in the day when we had funding from the Department of Energy through the ERA that we did energy audits of every municipally owned building in the whole Northeast Kingdom. So we have that data. It's old. So we had some idea of fossil fuel usage.
Mhm.
We know
did the
there's
same.
a lot of older, inefficient buildings out there still. So
I was just going to say that the Energy Action Network did a couple of, they had some interns last summer and they did some really deep diving into rural housing needs, and that those reports are, I can find them. They're on their website. They're videos.
is anyone from Efficiency Vermont on this committee or subcommittee?
Not on the committee, but we can ask them to join us at a meeting if we'd like to.
I know they've done a lot of work with schools and some other municipalities.
So we're at 3:55 and our hour went really fast. So when we look at, so we have to bring a fully developed scope of work to the VCC on the 22nd, and I see that as being these objectives and strategies, just as a kind of, because they will be high level. They won't be assigned and with timelines and with all that detail yet. But I think this is what is looked for. Am I right, Jane? Okay, great. So I think Catherine, what do you think about if we got together earlier next week to maybe suggest some additional strategies here, and then we could bring that back to the subcommittee for our Friday meeting next week and talk through them and then edit them at will. It's sometimes easier to start from a place and edit versus trying to create something from scratch. Although we've gotten a really good start here. What do folks like that approach?
I do.
This is Dave. I think so. And if someone could point me to this document, I can maybe send some ideas to Catherine as well.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering is if we can send it out to subcommittee members, and then I can be the collector, since Erica can be the collector of subcommittee nominations, and I'll be the collector of these recommendations.
Okay,
and
cool.
Then we can use those to build a draft that we get to you before the next meeting. But just send them to me, not the whole group.
Yeah, I'd like the opportunity to give you some thoughts ahead of time. I think it'll just be more efficient.
Yeah, excellent.
But I think this conversation has been really good for getting a sense of where people are thinking and our approach, and I think it's been really great.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, wonderful. So let's make sure. So next item on the agenda is meeting schedule, and thank you everybody for filling out the doodle poll. The most common time that worked for everybody was 1 to 2 on Friday afternoons. So we have scheduled out, I think, another month of meetings on Friday afternoons from 1 to 2. I think weekly meetings at this point are probably still prudent while we're getting things rolling. And does anybody have any issues or questions about that? Okay, let's leave a few minutes for public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to provide comment at this time? Okay, so any other, and I skipped over member announcements, and I'm sorry. Does anybody have any alibis or anything that they'd like folks to know for the good of the order? Awesome. Thanks for the wonderful discussion today, everybody. It was good. Okay, so we've got our marching orders before the next meeting, and we'll see you all next Friday, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Oh,
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Eric,
Okay.
you want to stay on a second?
yes.
Okay.
Can I
Um,
turn the recording off or should I leave it on?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.